And what we're looking at here is a teaching aid, and I'm kind of happy to see this. This is in a modern textbook shown to eighth graders. It's got some of it's in world history and has some of the earliest depictions of accomplishments of humans. And it shows you where they come from and their relation and things like that. Hopefully, they go into these much deeper, but I'm going to vamp over the top of this like I do. Looking at some of these, the earliest numbers they show here on this chart, one right here that you see that's located in the Alps, is actually musical instruments. Musical instruments are found 43,000 years ago. Oldest known instruments are flutes, giving alternate tones, which they have proven now actually are in key and do have correct tonality. Um, and they're made of mammoth bone. Now, they're found in the Swabian Alps in Germany. So this shows you one of the Earth's first people to make music. Now, this predates drums, things like that. It's believed that they didn't have the beat to go along with until much later. Our modern music is not the way that they had it back then, although Sumerians had a few different stringed instruments and lyres, and also a couple of different drums so they could put things all together. These people here aren't believed to have been shown to have the drum. Drums were used in certain things, and even in classical music, you can see drums are not given a constant beat. There's a tempo set by the maestro there, but drums aren't doom, doom, doom through the whole song. Certain ones they are, marches, things like this that are made much later, and that's an evolution of music. But it all starts from people like this, that it started with primordial flutes. There's also a smaller flute that they have that's made out of more of an antler type bone, and it has three holes in it and a cleft for the whistle, and so it has three notes. And I've made a video on it here not too long ago, maybe almost a year ago now, that shows somebody actually playing this and making music out of it, a modern musician using it to make music, which is kind of unique. And the original found, by the way, has a bird on it with a swastika symbol. So this swastika symbol goes way back. And in another one of these videos, I'll show that utilize this same 3D type of representation we're looking at now. We'll show and go into that a little bit more deeper. Now, down here in the edge of Spain, there was a map on a stone tablet found, believed to be the very first map that in use, by any humans at all, at 13,000 years ago. A stone tablet found in Abant's cave in Spain in 1993 contains the earliest known map, which is of the surrounding area. Now, I mentioned this or showed it in a video before, but it's basically a few of the little mountain ranges there, and you can indeed go outside the cave where this thing was, and you can kind of hold it up and go, yeah, that's that mountain range, and that's this one. And it's believed that they used it not having to go outside and point at these mountains, but they could now utilize, it's an idea of technology here. They could sit around a campfire and say, hey, let's go here tomorrow and hunt, let's go there tomorrow and hunt, and they're speaking about it in third person in their mind, being able to picture it rather than walking out pointing and talking about the sun coming up and things like that. Indeed, some insight to all of the cave paintings that you see through this entire area that they have. You see all these ancient horses on the walls and stuff, some cattle, mammoths and things like that. And I want to mention, it's something people probably, don't fathom or don't think about a lot, but that's not necessarily a snapshot. It's used over and over again repeatedly for that idea. It's not really a picture or a moment in time is what I'm getting at. You'll see sometimes where they're using them and they're hunting and they're going after them hunting. And is this, supposed to be them drawing a picture of, hey, you remember that great hunt a couple of years ago? Or is this just using a concept of, okay, we're hunting and you come around here, you come around here, and giving people directions on something that's very much like a map, but it shows you where he is, where we are, and all these ideas, and concepts that we're now using in our mind that we don't have to use the example of, we now mentally have the example of. It's kind of neat. A lot of those also contain constellations and star charts now. They've realized the one that's famous that has the bull on it actually is Taurus itself. You can line it up with it. And next to it is Orion and so on. And so there's a little bit more going on than we ever gave credit for these people. Let's look at another one here, wheeled vehicle here. In 3200 BC or so, the oldest known wheel used for transportation was unearthed in Slovenia in 2002 and is believed to have belonged to a two-wheeled cart. It's the remnants of a one-wheeled cart. It had some banding around it to help hold it together, a dual dowel rod, and indeed there's even some wear parts onto it that show you that out right here on this side they had a little disc that really helped to hold the axle. So this would have been a level of technology not just at a beginning either in any way, shape, or form. Now this of course is in contest with the Sumerians, who at some 3500 BC have a kid's toy that does show a wheel with an axle and two wheels. It's hooked up to an actual chariot or type cart, and then that cart seems to have a hookup that would go to a beast of burden. The little doll of the beast of burden is not found with it, but indeed it goes all the way there. So the mock battle between the Slovenians and them is that we have the first real wheel that looks like it was used, and all you have is a kid toy. Sumerians would say, yeah, we have a kid toy. Do you think it came from kid toys, or do you think the kid toy is a kid toy of something that already exists? It dates 300 years before that and shows beasts of burden in use. Of course, this would probably be beasts of burden in use, although people could be pulling the carts at these times. Now, so we're getting up into the area where there are horses and things that were used as the first beast of burden. Oxen, things like that. So, continue to look at it here. Bricks. 7500 BC. And they're found in Anatolia area here in Turkey. Now, the earliest known bricks are made of mud and straw. Experts believe they originated in Anatolia in Turkey. Again, we have a contest, though, with the Sumerians. They have the first bricks shown and the first fire-type bricks that have been used. And so you have a contest there. But then again, when we look at that, so here's Sumeria right here going through. And if we realize this is the Tigris and Euphrates not shown on this map, they run right into that. And these are pretty much those same people. And indeed, all these people that started all these civilizations through here all spread out from this one area, and we're all basically the same people. Somewhat changed over time and things that go into effect, but we're not going to look into that. We're really just kind of going over some old history here. But then you have the bricks. Now, I have one of my old caveman stories. And the reason I call them caveman stories is because whenever I was a kid, we thought that things back at this age were cavemen. And a caveman story idea of how we came up with fire bricks. Now, I believed that what they had done was made a hearth for fire out of these fired bricks, okay? And they quite often had to repair their walls, especially after hard rains and things like that. And over a period of time, they would start decaying and they'd repair them. Once they used fire bricks in the repairing of their wall. And perhaps even at that moment, it wasn't real evident to them how much harder and more lasting these bricks were. But once they had them in the wall, and then the wall started eroding again over 100 years or so, you would see that these bricks had lasted a whole lot longer, and then the concept of fire hardening bricks would have come out of it. 7500 BC is about the same time we give both of these areas as starting to utilize these bricks in buildings and things along that line. Surely the Sumerians actually glazed sides of them with lapis lazuli blue in different colors, and even make art that are on them that are only in pieces on each brick, but when put together makes one whole symbol. Lions, all kinds of embossed type things, and they were the first to seem to make a bas relief, things along that line. Now, aqueducts, we're looking at here. The aqueduct is about 2000 BC they're showing here. Now, this is, I guess, one level of the technology of aqueduct. But Aqueducts were channels running along the ground, underground or above ground, even across bridges that supplied fresh or river water to wherever people needed it. Aqueducts were first built in the ancient city of Nineveh in what we call Mosul now in Iraq. And Nineveh is one of the Sumerian cities, the famous early ones. Is believed to be perhaps the oldest, but there's a fight with that too on the fact of was there a city before there was this thing that we're trying to date right now? Did they make New York before they had the Twin Towers or right? So it's kind of a chicken or an egg type situation, and it's real hard to discern out of that, but definitely it goes back even before the time of the Egyptians easily, and they were the first people who had cuneiform writing and so on. Now, what I'd like to mention here is that that music in the background is haunting, um, is that this is a form of irrigation that is trapped now into man-made concrete ducts. They're man-made rivers, man-made alleys to carry water. And before this time, much before this time, there's definite evidence, and even in writing in the tablets, of how Lord Enki had come and showed them how to irrigate the fields by cutting into the edge of the riverbank and drawing back lines into their fields. And therefore, whenever the river came up, it would flood out on those lines and fill up. Now, an aqueduct is something that pretty much should be able to be used year round, and it transports water to an area that doesn't necessarily have it, and it's actually just another technological leap of that same thing. The Romans took it to another age, another level. Whenever they were able to even go across valleys and things, they had water at a certain height, and it dipped down to a valley, and they made giant bridges that were all aqueducts running. And through this whole run, they made it to where it all ran downhill just 1 or 2 degrees to where it constantly wanted to run that way. It wouldn't be too fast, not too slow. Most of them were covered, things like that. I'll definitely do one on the technology of a Roman aqueduct. It's even amazing, you think the Romans really had it going on pretty good. And when you look at aqueducts, you're like, yeah, they really did have it going on. A lot of concept to it. But so other things that are found here, soap at about 2800 BC. Soap is made of oils and salts and was first used in Babylon or modern day Iraq. And it was used to clean wool and cotton and perhaps people, perhaps animals, perhaps a lot of things ended up being cleaned with it. And it's neat. They have a recipe for it. It shows that to make the lime, that they would use saltwater plants, aquatic plants, but saltwater. So they'd have to come all the way down here to the Gulf and harness this. And then they would burn those into an ash that would make a potash. But that potash would contain a whole lot of lye and things in it. You know about lye soap. They'd use that in a combination of animal fats or like lard. And indeed, some of the old tablets, just little bitty tablets, will tell you that they had like 14 of these large urns of lard. This is what was traded back and forth. And you're like, how did you make up 14 lard? Man, you got a lot of lard. Well, these people were not small time in any way, shape, or form at the time that we're finding all these tablets at. And of course, the writing came much, much later. We're trying to date the people quite often nowadays to the time of those tablets. Those tablets come much later. Writing came to these people much later. Writing, of course, came to the world much later. Anyhow, so here's an interesting fact. Potter's wheel at about 3500 BC. That here we are with the Sumerians again, and that predates the Anatolian wheel up there by a few hundred years. Now, this potter's wheel allowed people to make perfectly round pots. Experts believe that it was invented in Mesopotamia, and the first showings come of that. But the first potter's wheel, too, looked very much like two wheels on an axle. One of the axles went down past the wheel. That would be set in a little hole in the ground. Someone would spin this thing, right? And the top plate you would put your clay onto and be able to round it off and spin and do the classical pottery type of wheel. Indeed, if you took this off the ground, laid it on its side, and rolled it, there you are with your first axle with wheels and things that come out of it. And it could be an easy jump from that potter's wheel. It's believed that actually the idea of the wheels for carts may have come from having the potter's wheel and having these interactions I just spoke of earlier. So that's kind of neat. Glass. Glass goes all the way back to 3500 BC. Now, not the clarity glass that we use today for our windows, but glass. And archaeologists believe that glass was first used in Mesopotamia, again, modern day Iraq, more than 5,000 years ago to make ornamental beads. And before this time, they were using lapis lazuli and things and actually making beads out of stone, any stone of color they found, anything that they could polish and things like that. And so you had your semi-precious stones. Indeed, even back in the Tales of Gilgamesh and so on, he names all these stones and he tells you which ones are harder than which ones. Which one is more over the other one. If you rub this to that, this cuts that. Kind of rock, scissors, paper, stone over a whole lot of minerals back then that they talk about. And it's supposedly decreed by him, but this again shows you probably a whole convex of thought that is just conveyed as him throwing it out there as being, I'm a king, I profess knowledge, if you will. Shadow clocks, what we might call a sundial. It's believed they go back to simple pillars in Egypt, and which ended up becoming all of the large pillars that you see across Egypt and the ones that were taken up into the Rome and so on after Egypt had fallen. And now even in the Vatican itself, they'll have these giant monoliths that are there. Now, the length of the shadow it would cast would indicate the time of day. And it's kind of neat that you would, when the sun rises in the east and you have this thing standing up straight, it would cast a shadow that would be running more to the east or to the west. And as it came up to noon, that shadow would disappear into the pillar. It would go away. This would be noon. And then it would start shadowing out to this side to its length all the way through till evening time. And by utilizing and seeing where these lines were, you could make time. You could section it out. You could see how long it had taken for each one. The Mesopotamians are believed to have a drip clock that they went off of that actually correlated with our seconds. And you can tell it has a lot to do with them because we have 60 seconds in a minute, and then we have 60 minutes in an hour, 12 hours a day, and they're the people that are based on 6, 60s, and 12s. Interestingly, came up with something a long time ago, looking at our finger digits and counting on your hands. And one of their things it talked about counting on your hand, it didn't say counting on your fingers. And so I'm thinking, and how do you do 6s and 12s and so on? If you look at your fingers, each one of your fingers has 3 individual digits or 3 individual areas. It has the first, the second, and the third are the tip. If you look here, we have them base 4, but then there's 4, so times 3 down, this is 12. And this is a way that you could count on your fingers like an abacus. And you could hold remainders. Your thumb becomes an extra. The idea of crossing out 4 with 5 is putting your thumb to your palm. I don't want to go into actual, Mesopotamian counting and stuff, but I'll do a video on it one of these days. Anyhow, shadow clocks and stuff. And a neat thing too, once they finally developed the sundial, they had marked down certain times and delineations on it. And then, even though it was a sundial constantly with a stick, you could take the blade part of it and spin it out to a certain area. Whenever the shadow got onto the blade of the other or overshadowed it, that was the time. That would, and so on. An interesting thing, I have to show you one day a clip that's from way back when Carl Sagan was making Cosmos, and he explains how they said that a well down here would actually have no shadow going down it in the middle of the day, and that their pillar there had no shadow on the longest day of the year. And so up north, he checked this fact with a plumb pillar, and it did actually have a shadow on it. And so he knew how to correlate the shadow with arcs, right? And he had somebody hand walk all the way down to Egypt and tell him how far that was. Come all the way back and tell him how far that was. And then use that to figure out the circumference of the earth. And he really was off by less than 1%. It's amazing. The little video kind of explains it and shows you how on a flat board, how they'd have the same, but as you bend it up, the one that's facing exactly at the equator would lose its shadow, but the other one would definitely still cast one. And what is that differential, and how far are we apart, and therefore how round is the world? And it shows you they knew a round world a long time ago. This whole idea of Columbus going to sail off the end of the earth was a whole different concept that I have in another video about Columbus coming up. That's read my pages here. It's about 8 or 10 away. But and I do keep hopping around here, people, a lot, and kind of like to do it that way. It slowly attaches a web that pulls everything together. And here they mention bronze at 3200 BC, and archaeological findings suggest that bronze was first used in ancient Egypt to make tools and weapons. And indeed, in Egypt, it was first used to make tools and weapons, it seems. They needed something harder than the rocks that they used to pound on their stuff. And it's believed that bronze was used, all that. There's a real good conjective idea on who had first invented bronze, because you have copper. And it was the Copper Age before that for a short time. And then someone found if they added tin, that it became much harder and much more durable, and also a little bit prettier and looked more like gold. And so this became the new fancy. This was your, electrum type woo thing that came on. It was the first alloy that people had pulled together. But there's a good fight on who that came from first. And again, we're going to look at coins here. Coins. Now, the first coin, they say, was used in the ancient kingdom of Lydia, which would have been up here off of Anatolia also. In modern-day Turkey, it was marked with a roaring lion. Now, in this idea, you can tell that lions just weren't in sub-Saharan Africa at this time, but indeed there was a North African lion, what they call a barbarian lion. And then there were lions that were over into here. You can see the lion iconography all over here in Sumeria and stuff where they have it going on. And there were lions out here because at this time this wasn't a wasteland and near a desert. This was actually an extreme fertile land, and there were giant groves of trees and cedar forest and all these different things going on at the time. So, but there's also a conjecture on that. There are coins that date all the way back to 1800 BC that look like that was a currency coin. Now, neat thing about these coins, and it goes back to the Sumerians, you see how this is a bas relief, or it's stuck out. So the idea here is that, you remember the Sumerian cylinder seals, the little cylinders that are cut into, that when you rub them on clay, that it embosses it with a bas relief with a flattened background. Kind of real neat technology that they had just starting out of nowhere, which again I think is one of the most amazing things about their civilization, that they had it all the way to that point. It's not a simple stamp. It's not like when people used to take wax and put it over a letter and then put their seal onto it. Comes from this, but the intricacy of their seal is quite incredible. And what you'd have to do is to make this coin is you'd have to make one of those reverse embossed, cut into seals of a lion, and you drip a piece of molten metal onto there, and then put another piece of metal on top of it and pound it, and it would become flat. And you look at all these old coins, and they're all stuck out over the edges and didn't quite round off real well and all these things. If there's too much of a blurb sticking out, they'd of course cut it off. This is a precious metal, and it has wealth, it has things attached to it. And the first coins from way back when only had one side to them. So then you can figure out what that they did was the piece of metal they set on top of it, they would have an emboss that they would put the drop into. And then whenever they would put the piece of metal on top, it was embossed also. The different picture. One of the first ones has like a palm leaf on one side, person's head on the other. And when you put that on there and you smack it, it embosses both sides at one time. It's basically minting a coin. And there we have like the same concept of the same coins we all see today, right? And the ridge that's around a coin originally was used to denote that's the edge of it. That's anything more, and you would try to cut that off. That was the amount of gold, that was the amount of silver, that was the amount of precious metal that they would actually make them out of. And one other thing they show you in here too is that right up here, the mystery of fire. Archaeologists have found evidence in Israel of the oldest known use of fire by ancestors of humans, such as Homo erectus. They discovered that burning happened in specific spots, which shows that hearths existed. The control of fire meant that Homo erectus was able to spread to colder regions, drive away dangerous predators, and cook food. I'll tell you now, too, that in ancient times and all the way up until biblical times, there were active volcanoes that were right near there. The original idea of Gehenna or Hades was actually from this volcanic thing. And supposedly what they would do is just take a dried stick over and come over and poke that fire and hold on to it. It would catch fire, and you could bring it back and harness your fire, and it was something easy to do. In fact, this is where an idea of a volcano god came from, Hephaestus, the idea of, man having harnessed fire from primordial times, the ancient story of Prometheus bringing man fire and so on like this. But this is really just uncontrolled burning and things, but yet it's finally being able to harness fire. If you've ever seen Clan of the Cave Bear, an ancient movie where there's really not any talking, but there's subheadings, and it's all about cavemen type thing. It's kind of neat to watch. It shows you kind of Neanderthals and perhaps the first Cro-Magnon woman, played by Daryl Hannah, and it's a little more adult with some of the scenes that they have into it, but it also shows you their quest for fire and how to keep it going, and I guess, kind of one look at what's possible for what caveman life was like. And but now, even looking back at that with the knowledge that we have since that movie that was really made in the I think it's 1980s, since then till now, the knowledge we have learned shows you that these people wouldn't have been as ugh as we show them to be in that movie. Although we can't keep from it, just like we can't keep from putting pirates in a strange Scottish or Irish accent and saying "ar," hey, my matey. We can't get out of that fact either. But who the pirates really were is another video entirely. Anyhow, kind of neat here, a teaching tool that shows you across Europe here where things had all started and happened, and where civilization had come from, and the pieces of civilization that, due to trade and immigration, migration, and moving through, caused them to all eventually get each other's technology and bring mankind into a new state of being. Like, share, and subscribe, guys. Enjoy.